She didn't remember when her life had last felt normal. All she knew was the weight of the cold pavement beneath her back as she stared at a sky that didn't care if she lived or faded away. The city lights flickered above her like distant promises, but none of them belonged to her. She had no home, no family who would open their doors, and no reason to believe tomorrow would be different. Yet on that bitter winter night, as her fingers trembled against her torn coat, she whispered to herself that she would not break. She didn't know how, but somehow she would rise. Somehow she would be heard. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us humanity still exists, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support makes these stories come alive. Her name was Amina, and her life had not always been a collection of nights spent hiding under abandoned bus stops or behind grocery stores. Once, she had dreams so loud, they filled her chest until she felt she would burst. She wanted to be a writer, to tell stories that mattered, that changed people's hearts. But life had a way of testing the ones who dared to hope. After losing her mother unexpectedly and falling into the hands of relatives who saw her as a burden instead of a blessing, she found herself slipping through the cracks, one bad decision, one misplaced trust, and she was out on the streets. Before she even realized how fragile security truly was, she became a ghost wandering the alleys, invisible to people rushing past, forgotten by the world she once believed she belonged to. The nights were the hardest. Cold didn't just sting her skin, it whispered cruel lies into her mind, telling her she was worthless, broken beyond repair. She would curl into herself for warmth, trying to drown the sound of her own heartbeat as hunger gnawed at her insides. She often wondered if anyone would notice if she disappeared. Sometimes she felt like she already had, but even in the lowest moments, she held on to stories. She would whisper them into the darkness, little pieces of hope stitched together in her imagination. In those stories, she was brave, she was seen, she was loved, and though they were only fantasies, they kept her alive when reality tried to swallow her whole. One morning, after a sleepless night beneath a narrow bridge, she woke to the faint hum of the city coming alive. People shuffled past her, careful not to look too closely, as if acknowledging her existence would make them vulnerable. She watched shoes and legs and hurried footsteps, each one belonging to someone with a place to be, a place she didn't have. Her stomach twisted with hunger so sharp it felt like she was being carved from the inside out. She forced herself to stand, legs heavy and weak, as she collected her few belongings. A torn blanket, an old notebook, and a pencil she guarded like gold. She wandered toward a public park where she knew a water fountain still worked, hoping a sip of cold water would quiet the ache long enough to keep moving. That notebook was her lifeline. On days when the world ignored her, she wrote. Sometimes the words came easily, flowing like rain down a window. Other times, they clung stubbornly to her mind, refusing to move. But she kept writing anyway. She wrote about pain and hope, about finding beauty in broken things, about the quiet strength hiding in a wounded heart. Most of all, she wrote about herself, or the version of herself she wished she could become one quiet afternoon. As she sat on a worn bench in the park scribbling into that notebook, a soft breeze rustled the pages. She didn't notice the older woman sitting a few feet away watching her with gentle curiosity. Amina had grown accustomed to people avoiding her, so she paid no attention. She kept her head down, hiding her tangled hair and the shame in her eyes. But life always has a moment where everything turns, sometimes subtly, sometimes like a whisper breaking through a storm. And for Amina, it came in the form of a stranger who simply cared enough to sit nearby. The woman had seen her in the park before, though Amina had never realized it. There was something in the girl's posture, the way she hunched protectively around herself, that revealed more than words could, a shadow that hinted at a story heavy with heartbreak. The woman noticed the notebook and the intensity with which Amina wrote, as if the pages held the only safe place for her soul. Moved by a feeling she couldn't explain, she left a small brown bag beside the bench before walking away quietly. Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a small note that said, "You are stronger than you think." When Amina found it, her breath caught in her chest. She looked around, confused, wondering who had left it, but the park was empty. She held the note in her trembling hands, reading it again and again. Someone had seen her. Someone had believed she had strength, even when she felt she had none. It was the smallest act of kindness, yet it thawed something inside her that had been frozen for too long. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, not just for the food but for the feeling of being remembered. Days passed, and tiny acts of kindness found their way into her life. A cup of tea left on a bench, a scarf draped over the park railing, a pair of gloves placed neatly beside her sleeping spot. She never saw who left them, but they became a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. With each unexpected gesture, her chest felt lighter, her soul less burdened. She began to write more in her notebook, filling page after page with stories of hope and transformation. She began imagining a future, however fragile. Her turning point came on a rainy morning when she sought shelter under the awning of a small community center. She stood shivering, clutching her notebook protectively from the rain. A volunteer noticed her, a young man with tired eyes but a warm smile. Instead of looking past her, he approached gently, offering her a dry towel and a cup of warm tea. She hesitated, unused to acceptance, but her exhaustion won. He invited her inside, not to interrogate her, not to judge her, but simply to offer safety. Inside the center, for the first time in months, she felt warmth that wasn't stolen from a vent or a discarded blanket. As the days turned into weeks, the community center became a refuge. The volunteers encouraged her to join writing workshops and gave her fresh notebooks when they noticed how quickly she filled pages. They saw something powerful in her words, something raw and beautiful, something that came from surviving a world that had tried to silence her. Slowly, cautiously, Amina began to trust. She began to dream again. She found herself laughing at times, smiling at others, feeling emotions she thought she had lost forever. One evening, the center organized an open mic event and gently encouraged her to read one of her pieces. Fear surged through her, the fear of being seen, of being judged, of not being enough. But as she held her notebook in her trembling hands, she remembered the small note left by the mysterious woman. "You are stronger than you think." With a deep breath, she walked onto the dimly lit stage. Her voice shook at first, but the words carried weight. The weight of her truth, her suffering, her resilience. As she read, the room grew still. People listened, really listened. When she finished, the applause washed over her like a miracle she had never imagined. For the first time in years, she felt heard. The days that followed changed everything. A local writer who had attended the event approached her with interest in her work. The volunteers encouraged her to submit her stories to small publications. Slowly, her voice began finding its way into the world. She wasn't just a homeless girl with a notebook anymore. She was a storyteller, a survivor, a young woman rising from the ashes of her past with courage she never knew she had. Years later, after publishing her first small collection of stories, Amina returned to the same park where she once hid under a worn blanket. Her hands were steady now, her steps firm. She sat on the same bench and opened a brand new notebook. The sunlight warmed her face, and she inhaled deeply. She had not forgotten where she came from. Her scars still lived beneath her skin, but they no longer defined her. They empowered her. She had gone from invisible to seen, from forgotten to valued, from homeless to heard. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, and share. Your support helps us bring more life-changing stories like this to the world. Before the ending, tell us in the comments, what part of Amina's journey inspired you the most? In the end, her journey wasn't just about survival. It was about rediscovering her worth, reclaiming her voice, and proving that even broken hearts can bloom again when shown compassion. Her story reminds us that a single act of kindness can change an entire life. Amina rose because someone believed she could, and now, her voice carries that belief forward, echoing hope into the hearts of others walking through their own darkness, because sometimes all a person needs is to be seen.